Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Many of you know there's just been a lot of craziness in the world. So I've been trying to keep up with the news and all of the issues going on, in addition to running my practice and my business as much as possible. So there have been some topics that have recently come up, or I've noticed some themes in my sessions, or just some general issues that I've come across, or that people have brought up to me, and I feel like some of this information needs to be shared. There needs to be some public education on some of these issues. And the one that I've decided to talk about today is the concept of consent. Now, this is going to probably turn into a broader series, because I really want to get into the role of consent in victimization and abuse in general, and then talking about religious trauma, and talking about cults and studying cults, and what defines a cult, what is brainwashing. These are all concepts that are ultimately tied in together. But today I'm primarily just going to be covering the topic of consent, and this is going to be more of a general introduction to the topic. So this is from the website, and I should probably preface the trigger warning for anyone who's been a victim of these things, but this is from the RAINN website. It stands for Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. So most of you know I am a sexual abuse specialist. So these are topics that are near and dear to my heart. So what is consent and what does that look like? So legally, consent, the definition of consent can vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but essentially consent is something that has to be verbalized or can be communicated non-verbally, but typically speaking needs to actually be verbalized and affirmed when two or more individuals are going to be engaging in some sort of sexual activity. So like it says here, consent is an agreement between participants to engage in sexual activity. It should be clearly and freely communicated. A verbal and affirmative expression of consent can help each of you understand your boundaries, desires, etc. Consent is not present when someone is incapacitated in some way, shape, or form. If you are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, you cannot give consent. I've worked with a lot of sexual abuse and sexual assault victims who blame themselves because they were at a party and they were drinking and they feel like they are at fault. You are not at fault. When someone decides to violate you and put their penis in you, that is not, you have no part in that, especially if you're incapacitated. So please understand that it doesn't matter how much you drink or what you wear or what you look like. All of that is irrelevant. And quite frankly, it's very ignorant to blame a victim based on those things. It's really very simple. You either have consent or you don't. And consent, again, is a verbal affirmation without any sort of incapacitation. So being under the influence of alcohol or drugs, automatically no consent, because cognitively you do not have the capacity at that point in time to give consent. Meaning, your body may want something, but do you really understand what you're doing and the consequences of those actions? And if you're under the influence, you don't have those capabilities. So there it is. I laid it out for you. If this has happened to you, it was non-consensual, and there is a term for that. So if you have questions or wonder if this has happened to you, please reach out to me. I'm happy to consult with you on that. Additionally, if someone is asleep or unconscious, and I've heard this one too. I've heard victims blame themselves. They were clearly drugged because they're coming in and out of consciousness. Maybe they had 2 beers. There's no way you would be blacked out. So that says to me, okay, this person had to have probably also been drugged. If you're unconscious or if you're asleep, you can't give consent. There is no verbal and cognitive ability to give consent at that point in time. If they're, so like it says here, if you're under pressure of intimidation or threat, that is referring to coercion. So coercive behaviors, coercive acts, coercive control. If there's any sort of coercion in a situation, that is also abuse. You cannot give consent. So with things like unequal power dynamics, student, teacher, employee, employer, parent, child, etc. There's also no consent because you have to have an equal amount of power in the dynamic to be able to give consent. If there's unequal power, meaning someone is in this position and someone is in this position, the person down here cannot give consent. That is not consensual because it would be made under coercion and just a lack of understanding the dynamics between them. So I hope that this is helpful for some people who may be struggling with understanding consent. It is very, very simple. Consent is it's one of the easiest things to understand when you really understand what the word means. You either have consent or you don't. Consent is about communication. You're either able to communicate or you're not. You're either able to think clearly or you're not. And if someone is wanting to engage in sexual activity with you and you've been under the influence, you're using alcohol, drugs, or you're half asleep, you don't have to agree to any sexual activity. And it is also up to your partner to be aware of what the definition of consent is and to know when there's consent and when there isn't. So there really needs to be much more education regarding consent. Please get this information out there to your middle school children, your high school children, college age individuals. Everyone needs to know this information. What is consent? And you either have it or you do not. And if you proceed with sexual activity when you don't have consent, you are now victimizing someone. So you need to understand that. For victims, you need to know that you can change your mind at any time. So you can be interested in kissing or even making out, fooling around, whatever you want to call that. And then be like, no, you know what? I've gone far enough. This is my limit for today. And it is up to your partner to respect that. If they don't respect that and they try to talk you into going further than you want to go to, or they force you into going further than you want, they have now violated your boundaries and they don't have consent. And again, there is a 4-letter word that describes what that is. So please know that. Okay. If you are engaging in sexual activity with a partner, I really hope that you know your partner and that you can trust that person to have your best interest in mind. Sexual activity is not something to be taken lightly because if you don't know the person or you don't trust them, you can't really trust that they're going to respect your boundaries or your ability to consent or not consent. So, periodically checking in with your partner, asking them, is this okay? Do you like this? Waiting for them to say yes. Also, look for physical cues because we can speak with our body. And if someone is tensing up or looking away or they're looking very uncomfortable, you don't have consent and you need to be checking in with that person. So, again, this is not rocket science. This is very simple and easy to understand when you understand the definition of consent. Consent does not look like this. The refusing to acknowledge no, you are automatically violating someone's boundaries. A partner who's disengaged, non responsive, or visibly upset, if you have a partner who's crying during sex, that should be a clue to you that something is wrong and that is not consensual. Assuming that wearing certain clothes, flirting, or kissing is an invitation for anything more. I can't tell you how many times I hear this, and it's a super pet peeve. Well, people will want to blame the victim, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Why are you not blaming the person who decided to stick their penis into someone else? Like, what planet do you live on? What clothes you wear, or how you flirt with someone, or kissing someone are not invitations for something more. Consent occurs each step along the way, and again, you either have it or you don't. Someone being under the legal age of consent, now that is defined state by state. And in Arizona, the legal age of consent is 18. You cannot legally give consent for sexual activity under the age of 18. Also, there's a statutory rape law that if the person is more than 2 years older, that is an automatic crime, just so you know. We already talked about someone being incapacitated. This is another one. Assuming you have permission to engage in a sexual act just because you've done it in the past. Just because you've been sexually involved with someone in the past does not mean that you were entitled to it in the future. You were never entitled to anything, and you must always ask for consent each and every time. So if you're kissing someone and that person is giving you verbal or nonverbal cues that you can keep going, okay, great. You keep checking in each step of the way to make sure that you are protecting that person's boundaries. I think that is everything that I wanted to go over from this page. Now, you can go to their website and get more information regarding the topic of consent and sexual knowledge, etc. So I hope that this is helpful for some of you.